Sarah.
Melissa.
What are we doing today?
We're chatting with classmate and friend Everton McLean.
Everton, thank you so much for joining us. We are very excited to have you on this, the 16th anniversary of knowing you. The three of us met in the fall of 2007, which, yes, do the math, 16 years ago. Actually, I didn't do the math. Is it 16 years ago?
It is definitely 16 years ago.
The math, my version of math was last year it was 15, ergo this year is 16.
I mean,
but
yeah.
That is math. That's +1.
Everton, do you have any fond memories or not so fond? I'll leave that to you of our times in grad school 16 years ago that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I think that class was a really special class. I'm sure every class says that, but I felt like it was really special. I thought we all got along in a way that is not usual for a group of people coming from all different parts and different experiences. And but maybe it is usual when you go to grad school in Newfoundland and you decide that's what you're going to do. Maybe that worked out that way. But we were all quite different too. Like one of the things that I kind of felt like I missed out on was I was just married, had a house we were working on getting out there, and I didn't get to dive as deep into the class outings as they weren't really class outings, the bar scene and stuff like that, as some other folks did. I wish I had, but it was great times for sure.
That is a very kind way of putting it. The class outings, like our field trips to George Street, our excursion, our experiential learning opportunities.
You and your wife, Karen, who I almost feel like was a bonus classmate.
Yep.
I mean, aside from the classwork that we did and the time that we spent in the seminar room, like when we would go out socially, Karen was always a part of it. And so she just was a part of our crew. And although I did look at you guys as like, oh, these are the adults of the class. And I just thought like, wow, these people are really doing it. And your oldest was born like a little bit after the MA program ended. Was she
After
born
it ended for you? Yeah, I was in a little longer.
But I felt like you guys did really make a good go of being a part of everything. And
we tried. And at the same time, the house made me go to work. So I was working as a journalist at the Telegram for a while.
Right.
And that was a really great experience too. But I felt like I was so split like at that time. But now as a 41-year-old with 3 kids and job, and my wife has a business here, and now I realize it wasn't split at all. I was very focused. There was nothing going on really.
You probably brought a different perspective to our studies because of that background. As having like been a professional, like sometimes I think we were the worst set of people to be reading and talking about books. We had no life experience, like none. What did we know about marriage and divorce and life and parenting? We knew nothing.
And working
and work
full time.
Yeah. Whereas like you actually were like living in, and I refuse to use the term real world, but you were living in a much more populated part of the world than we were.
Well, I don't think it's totally different, because the one thing that I found was that having been a journalist, I was really focused in on what a story is and how to tell a story that would interest people. And then so when we talk about some of these pieces, I was like, this is just garbage. Like some of the stuff we were reading, because I'm like, you can't read it. It doesn't make any sense. It's terrible. I'm thinking about white tie and decorations, like that kind of stuff.
I don't have that book. It's next to me on my shelf over here.
Do you?
And I actually never read it.
Burning leaves out of it to light a fire and stuff. Like maybe it's good. I don't know. I shouldn't say.
I love that you just went for it. You're like, and the book that I am talking about, I thought you were going to be like, generally speaking, there were some pieces of work less merited of our time, but you're like, here's the one.
Who wrote that?
I think it was like Sir Wilfrid Winifred, like it was some
that kind of stuff. I mean, that
dead old white guy for sure.
When you got to like short stories that were actually focusing on telling a story and some snippet of life, that was the part that I really liked. And that's what interested me in journalism too. So there were a lot of connects. I would say, while you guys may have felt like we were grown-ups, we definitely were not grown-ups at that point. So I don't feel like I had a lot coming in more than anybody else did.
If anything, I feel like our classmate Chris LeDrew.
Chris LeDrew would have,
He would have, because he really had been living and working, and he was a little bit older than us and had children, and so
interestingly, definitely. I feel like he felt like less of a grown-up, but yet had more life experience. And I hope Chris heard that, because I feel like he would really appreciate that. Sarah, I cannot believe that you literally had that
I
book
have it. And
within
I mean, talk
arm's
about,
reach.
you can tell I never cracked this book
Yeah,
at
not cracking.
all. Like, it is pristine. The seat, like the binding has like no evidence at all that this book has ever been opened. And it wasn't. I don't know how I got away with it, but I did not read this book, even though it was assigned to us
Yeah.
in one of our classes. So it is Sir John and Lady Hope Simpson in Newfoundland, 1934 to 1936. Edited by Peter Neary. Yeah.
I have to make a confession here. So although that book, not our favorite, and I don't think that I read very much of it, there's a line in that book where she says, "You'll always know the Newfoundlanders in heaven because they'll be the least happy because they wish they were back in Newfoundland," or like something to that effect. That's not like a direct quote, but I have like used that in promotional material that I've done for different jobs over the years about like, we already live in heaven. So like, what would heaven possibly have to offer a Newfoundlander? So it had some impact. It's foggy in heaven, I think, actually.
I think
All the
it
clouds.
seems that way. Feels that way. Yeah, you're right. Maybe it is St. John's after all.
Surprise.
Yeah.
First of all, we should announce the title of the book we're going to talk about, but we're going to talk about The Path of Most Resistance by Russell Wangersky. And just so you know, Tom and I were workshopping a couple of parodies of this title. We were thinking The Path of Moist Resistance, which I said would be a hilarious pornographic parody.
Also, probably works with some of this, to be honest, I'm going to say.
Tom thought it would be a better thriller, like a horror book about like a mold invasion.
There's a mold thing in here too.
Whoa. Look at that.
Gasp.
Halford.
Wow.
Got the
Okay,
finger on
we
the
were onto
pulse.
something.
Wow.
Yeah.
Finger
Right?
on the pulse. Yep.
So Russell Wangersky, connections here. Number one, originally born in Connecticut.
I
pointing
know.
to Sarah.
I saw that. I was like, whoa.
What are the
My mind was
odds?
blown.
And secondly, I mean, Everton, was he like your boss at the Telegram?
He was like 4 steps above me at Telegram, but he was my boss and would occasionally peek out of his office and come tell us about an editorial he was writing or make some kind of quip. When I was there, actually, I wrote the article about him getting the Rogers Writers Trust Award, $50,000 at the times, big deal back in maybe 2008. But a great guy, a great writer, I think. I read his book recently about firefighting, a nonfiction book about his experiences with post-traumatic stress disorder following being a volunteer firefighter, and it was really excellent. That was the one that he'd won the award with.
Did you name your son after him?
No, I knew this was going to come up. I did not. That would be embarrassing to say that here. No, I didn't. But to Russell's credit, my wife came to me with the name, and she came to me many names earlier, and I was like, no, I had a student with that name, and no, or I had a friend with that name. I was like, no, and I didn't say no to this one because I had respect for Russell. So not named after him, but
not named
after him.
So when it comes to short stories, it's tricky to offer like a summary or a synopsis, but can you maybe give us some short description of maybe like the overall feel of the book, or maybe some overarching themes that you felt came through in this collection?
If I had to go with like a voice or the feeling of it, I would say it's Alice Munro is not popular to talk about right now, and Dubliners, James Joyce. There's a lot of Canadiana in it, but there's also a little bit of that rooted in St. John's in a lot of the stories that feels a little bit like Dubliners. He didn't go all the way there, and that's why I say it's more like a cross between. Each story is more of a look into the lives of individuals, which is both those authors, their short stories tend to focus on, the small picture story. Opens up to bigger themes, of course, but that's the way it rolls through. The first story is called Rage, and it's about a person just experiencing road rage on the way home. Very small story in the sense of like, it's not looking at broad concepts, but it's looking at driving around in St. John's. You'll see the roads that this person's going, and eventually they go through enough of an episode trying to keep cool in the road rage that they eventually crack at the end. Shows the way people can bend and break across the course of their journey.
So did you have a favorite story and a least favorite story, in particular a story that might work well on its own or could even be fleshed out more to be more than a short story?
I think most of them could be, but I don't think it would improve the story to make it more than a short story. Part of the reason I did short stories is because my life's so pulled in many directions that finding the consistent time to start and finish a novel in a short enough time period that I don't lose the thread is difficult. A book of short stories, because in just about time I'll finish a story and then I can move on to the next one next day. You don't have to keep on keeping it together. But there were some stories that stand out in this one. And for me, the last story, which is Heavy Load, was interesting because I read the first half of it and I was like, this is not for me, which is fine. Like I liked all of them until then. And then the last one I didn't like. And then at the very last paragraph, it shows a side of the main character who's this heavy equipment operator or a professional engineer moving a big piece of equipment across some landscape, I don't know exactly which one, into a port to be shipped overseas to an oil field or something. So it's all very technical about the weights and you got to watch and yada yada yada. I'm like, I don't care. Like this stuff is not for me.
Yeah.
And then cuts drastically to a conversation with his wife about the kids are grown up out the door. It's just two of them home eating their regular everyday meal that they have every day. It's like that repeated. This is a theme in piece 2 that there's this domestic life that becomes so gray and usual every day after day that becomes so boring that people eventually leave it or break. And so his wife brings up to him, I need more than this. And he tries to engineer it. He's like, well, you know what? We could be intimate on Thursday evenings, and that should work because Mondays and Tuesdays are quite busy. And then Wednesday we need a rest. And then Thursday nights could be our night for intimacy. And she's like, this is fucking ridiculous. Can I swear on here?
Yeah,
This is
go for it.
ridiculous. So she leaves him and he flips right back to, okay, I still need to pick up groceries. Yeah, you know, it's very engineering until the very last paragraph. I don't know if I should spoil it or not, but I mean, it's
You're
out for
swearing, you
8
may
years.
as well spoil.
Yeah.
And it's only one story out of a whole collection.
That's
so,
a whole collection.
yeah.
But the very last paragraph, this is the last story in it. And I just spoke with rage was the first when the guy loses it and goes after somebody in a fit of rage and driving. This guy's on the road. He sees a man attacking his wife and he loses it in a fit of, I don't know if it's honor or whatever, and runs after the man and says, I'm coming for you. I'm going to help you, Bev, which is the wife's name. He flips back to his wife. So there's this like connection that comes from the first story to the last story. And that last paragraph really saved it for me for the whole story. If it had been a novel that started that way, I would have closed it after a page. But
I feel like there's a sweet spot when it comes to short stories as a format. And I do not gravitate to short stories generally. Like clearly I don't like really long and I don't like really short. I'm a very specific reader, I guess, in terms of length.
Goldilocks over here.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah. But I feel like a short story either has to be so short, it's like one sitting only. Like if there are multiple sittings to get through a short story, it's too long. But
Yeah, because at that point, doesn't it become like a novella? I don't know what the rules are for a short story, but I do feel like a short story must be, as a writer, actually harder to write than a longer format. You have to have all the components to make the reader feel satisfied by the end of it. But you've got to be able to develop characters. You've got to make, your reader kind of be invested and feel like there's hopefully a payoff, or even if it's not a payoff where something was resolved, it's made you think, or that there's been a point.
I feel like Claire Keegan of Small Things Like These is the master of the short story. I feel like she just has this ability to do exactly what you were just talking about, Sarah. It's like give you just enough that you feel so gratified and so enriched for having read it, but you also don't have that many questions. I was listening to an interview once that someone said to her, your writing style is so sparse. And she said, but I feel like I give you everything you need, because people have questioned her on Small Things Like These. Like it was so short. And she was like, once I said everything there was to say, why would I have kept writing? That it wasn't like she set out to write a novella. It was a novella because when she said all the things she wanted to say, it was too long to be a short story and it was too short to be a novel.
The best stories are ones that are written, novels included, to the length they need to be, and then they finish the story, and that's it.
So did you say that the first story and the last story connect, like almost they're in the same universe, for lack of a better term?
I don't think they're in the same universe. I think the themes are the same in the same universe. I think there's a thread of like an incident on a road. There's a theme of things happening on the road and travel throughout this whole collection as well. And I think those two pieces tie together just neatly enough of a guy getting really mad and attacking somebody else on a road. They connect directly enough that there was a reason one was at the first and one was at the end. But there's travels all through here. The second short story is called Armenia, and that's the one you were talking about, moist. But there's a map of Armenia growing on a mold in a wall, and this fellow is sort of taken in by an attractive young woman, and she takes him for everything, basically, and leaves him in this dingy apartment with Armenian map growing on the wall. It looks like an Armenian map, but it's just
the
mold
pattern
growing.
of the mold.
and there's something with rot and decay and something with nastiness in there that I think is really interesting. But then she takes off and leaves him. One of my favorites actually is Baggage. Very similar to the last story where the relationship with her husband has fallen apart. There's just dullness. He comes home every day, sitting in his chair, just a really dull life that she's living. So every day she goes to baggage stores in the mall and checks out the different bags, daydreaming about buying them and moving away. And instead, she ends up with a young guy who picks her up, and they end up in a hotel room, and she has that experience, and then she comes home to him afterwards. But that little secret's enough to give her something in her life.
It's kind of a funny contrast in terms of like, I think of journalism as only writing about the exciting and writing about really fast-paced things and things that change every day. And I wonder if that influenced like this idea of, like you said, just sort of the mundane and just repetition. Do you think there's anything there?
People who work in newsrooms really see the exciting things, but because you're there every day, when you're watching news, you probably remember the exciting things, and then you get the realization that most of the paper is full of like school council meetings, and it's the same thing. You get a cadence that there's the same thing every week, every day, and you're living with it. I think he actually drills into that one very specifically in one of his stories called The Revolution. It's the only one that he's in a newsroom, and this one is from the first person voice of overnight news reader, and so he spends his nights just regurgitating news, and he'd be every hour had to read 5 minutes of news, and he'd just be regurgitating like news releases and just changing the words from the police a little bit. The payoff in the end is that this guy says, can't get any other job. This is a boring job. I'm going to cause a revolution. And instead of reading the news, he spends the whole night leaving dead air for 5 minutes. We're in a podcast scenario here. Imagine if we're just quiet for 5 minutes and nothing happens. People will tune out. So it's a huge no-no. And he does it overnight 5 times in a row, and he's like just waiting for the call and people to fire him. He's going to break loose of these shackles of this boring life. He's going to go on with this other girl and stuff, and nobody calls because nobody cares. So that was one of my favorite in a sense, although it was the most dull throughout most of it. I think that's also often the thing with these short stories. You're reading and like, okay, what's it going to be? There has to be something, and then when it is something that kind of tickles you, you're like, okay, that was great.
In preparation for this, I listened to an interview that he did with, I think it was CBC Radio out of St. John's, probably back in like 2017 or 2018, around when the book came out. And one of the things that they talked about was this overlying theme of like passive aggression. Did you see that or feel that?
I don't know if I saw that, but maybe if I had to, I could pry it out of the reticence of a lot of people within these stories to actually do anything about it until it's too late. Like there's some pent up anger. I think the most passive aggressive, if you're looking at any of them, is the second last story where a 70-something-year-old man has spent his life with his 6 siblings and refuses to sort of give in to them, or like they're all like sort of staunch in their ways. And so when they're all dying off, they don't really reach out to one another or do anything about the fact that they're like having their last time together. And he's just left. He's the last one. And he sits in his own bed for 3 days and doesn't move. I think it's called 3 days, just waiting for his 2 kids to call because he's too passive aggressive, I guess, to actually make the call to say, hey, I need some help here. Instead, he said, piss himself and sit in his bed for 3 days than do anything about it. So there's that. The rest of it, I think there's some naivete to certain characters where they don't know how to act, and so they don't do anything. They let it sort of run to the point where somebody else does something.
I'm even thinking like about the baggage story or even the final story that you mentioned about the engineer and like people living passively, unable, I should say, to take action.
Yep.
The engineer's like, okay, well, I'm going to use my engineer brain to like, okay, well, we could reason this out. This person is calling for me to make an actual true change.
Yep.
And
no,
I'm unable to do that.
That's definitely a theme. I think the passive part of it is there very directly. There's aggression in there very directly. People being passive aggressive is less, but in there, the passiveness is just like time and time again, it's a guy getting caught not reading the signs as relationships falling apart and ending up driving to the point where the relationship falls apart and he's left picking up the pieces.
I know I kind of made a bit of a joke about the title coming into this, mostly because I have a hard time just being serious in general. But as we're like having this conversation, it seems like the title is actually like a really cool way to encompass all of these stories, but also to encompass life's experiences in general. Like life is the path of most resistance. Like everything we're doing, all the decisions we're making every day. And I do think like this idea of the paths and life's journeys, and even just the fact that like driving seems to be, a theme of how he's representing that. I'm actually like kind of excited about how that title must reflect so much happening in these stories.
Much of this collection is about going through life, and instead of choosing the least resistance, choosing the most resistance. And the most resistance not being the thing that you would think it is living the regular life is the most resistance. It's the biggest grind, right? And then people not choosing to make a change.
Growth happens on the edges of the comfort zone.
Yeah, for sure.
Sarah, would you like to pose the titular question? I just wanted to say titular.
I certainly would. So, Everton, when thinking about this book, The Path of Most Resistance, would you call this book a could read, a should read, or a must read?
I mean, there's no must reads in the world, really. That is my opinion. I don't.
Excuse me?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I yeah. Okay.
No. So why are there no must reads?
Well, I mean,
Because we're all so different.
we're also different. I'm strangely moved away from reading as my favorite way to take in content. So I'm more of a must-see guy now. Is that embarrassing for me to say?
Must-see TV? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if I were to say should read, I think people should read this short story collection. I think if you're going to have a must-read category, I would put it in there as well, especially if you're our ages where you're starting to hit middle age and you're looking at life and thinking about where are you, where you've gone, what you've done. There's lessons to learn in there. It rings true. And there's some fun in there too. Like there's a story where two old guys just have a competition, see who can finish their driveway of snow quickest and get to the widowed lady next door, do her driveway fastest, right? And there's nothing sexual in that one. It's one of the few with nothing sexual. The whole
Depends on how you read it, I'm sure.
Yeah, sure. The whole purpose, to my mind, is to prove that you're, well, maybe. Holy jeez,
See?
you got me thinking now.
Now that you're thinking about it, yeah.
The minute you said plow, I was,
yeah, that's great.
Hey, no, maybe, but anyway, there's a lot in there that speaks to the middle-aged person to look at life and look at how far you've gone, where can you go, and when do you make some decisions and choices that work for you. So yeah, I would put it in the must-read category for that perspective.
It makes me kind of want to read this collection.
Oh, you definitely should.
Yeah, there we go.
There it is. Well, Everton, I mean, thank you for coming here, for forcing us to confront even how we have decided to model this entire show around these questions.
I didn't mean to do that.
Always great to reconnect with you. Give our absolute very best to the whole family. Thank you so much, and we'll have to do this again sometime soon.
Thank you so much. I'll end up reading another book if we do that. That'd be great.
We'll do it on a TV show next time if you want.
Now we are on TV, on Rogers TV. So yeah, next time. And then it'll be a must watch.
Yep.
Thank you.